Welcome to A Preacher and His Work. I'm your host, Mark Teskey. I have with me Eddie Parrish. Eddie preaches for the Graber Road congregation in Rosenberg, Texas, where he's been for almost a couple of years now. Welcome to the program, Eddie.
I appreciate it very much. Good to be with you again.
Always a pleasure to have you here. Eddie and I worked together for about 7 years side by side, and he doesn't like to admit this often in public, but was actually one of my instructors when I was going through preaching school.
Yeah, blame me. I'm sorry. No, that's true. But he survived anyway, and in spite of me, has done well.
Oh, I appreciate that, and good memories and lots of fun that we've had over the years, and enjoyed the friendship and the camaraderie and the downright fun we've had from time to time.
Yeah, it's been great. Been awesome.
Yeah, I traveled from South Texas all the way up to Alaska and spent time many places in between as well.
Yep. Good times.
Absolutely. There's been good times, and there's been some times that have been less than what we would have wanted them to be. And I'd like to spend some time on this episode talking about that. And several years ago, things weren't going well for you. You want to fill our viewers in on kind of what happened back then?
Yeah, I was about to say I'd be glad to, but and in a way I am. I've for those that know me, I've kind of been an open book about this, and so it's, to some degree it's painful, but in other ways it's part of who I am. It's part of what happened, and if my story can help other people, then I'm willing to tell it. And basically, it was the first Sunday night in May of 2009 that after I had preached the sermon that night, I got back up into the pulpit and I quit. I just quit. I announced to the congregation that I couldn't do it anymore. That I had basically decided that I just didn't have the heart for preaching any longer, and so I just said I quit, and I walked off of the stage and just went out the hallway, walked up the hall, went in my office, sat down at my desk, and just cried like a baby. And the poor song leader, Sam Harding, was leading singing that. Now he had to get up, and deal with that, but I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't thinking clearly, in that emotional place where I was at the time. But the elders of the congregation, this was when I was with the Brown Trail Church, and the elders came in to my office, and other people had come in there, and they politely asked them to step out, and they basically said, you know what, we're not interested in accepting any resignations right now. So, but they said, you take as much time as you need to find out what's going on in your heart and in your mind and in your life, and let's get this worked out. And so I took some time away.
Now, at this point in time, was there problems with your marriage, problems with your family? No, there weren't. My marriage has always been strong. It was even then. My poor wife, Mary, she wasn't even in attendance that night at that worship assembly. She was sitting up with one of the lady members who was had cancer and had to have people sit with her, and so she was there so that the lady's husband could come to worship that night. She had no idea that I was going to do this, and so when I got home that night, as Ricky Ricardo would say, I had a lot of splaining to do, But again, you know, I wasn't thinking clearly. But no, there was no problem with the marriage. My kids were still at home then, great. My relationship with the elders and the congregation was good. We didn't have any problems with that. So from a logical standpoint, one would think there wouldn't be any reason for me to have gotten that low, just from a pure logical standpoint. But that's one of the things about you know, depression and burnout, whatever term you want to use for that. A lot of times it's not a logical thing. It's an emotional thing. And so no, you know, I wasn't having any problems family-wise, congregational-wise, none of that. It was just me. And I think I just burned out. That's the term that, you know, as I did some reading and studying about that concept, it was like, you know, the guys that wrote books about burnout, especially burnout in ministry and things like that, it was like those guys had been living with me. So I'm pretty convinced that that's what it was.
So at that point, and we were working together side by side and spent time together nearly every day through that. Outwardly, from what everybody could see looking in, didn't see it.
Yeah.
But you could see it and you could feel it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I knew for months that if something didn't change, that night was going to happen when I just gave up. But it's, you know, it's one of the unwritten rules for preachers. You can't let people see that. And it's one of the unwritten rules that needs to be, you know, that needs to be burned, needs to be discarded. But it was, you know, I thought, you know, my inner thinking was, you know, I'm a preacher of the gospel. People look to me for instruction. They look to me for stability. They look to me for, you know, spiritual strength. There's no way I can let these people know that I'm struggling. You know, it's like, you know, it's the old question about who ministers to the minister. You know?
Exactly.
And at the time, I wasn't letting anybody do that. It wasn't that there weren't people willing to do it. I just wasn't doing it. It was a pride thing, I think, ultimately, that kept me from seeking the help that I needed, to just be able to find somebody that I could open up to and vent my frustrations and work through some things. There were plenty of people that would have done that, you know, one sitting at the table here with me, but I didn't feel like at the time that I could afford to do that. And so what I ended up doing was quitting.
Yeah, you bottle up long enough and it just explodes.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, and I'll, as we begin talking about this, I'll make it very clear, this wasn't a case of sin in your life that brought this about. But in talking to guys who have had struggles with sin, the things they talk about are really very similar. You know, who does a preacher go talk to when he's struggling with a sin? Everybody else comes talks to the preacher.
Right.
If a preacher talks to the elders about a sin, he could be putting his job on the line.
Yeah.
So that gets to be a difficult thing, and the same thing where they're isolated. And, you know, there's so many different things that can cause that type of feeling. And now that we've kind of established the problem, let's start talking a little bit about solutions.
Okay.
How do we prevent this? You know, somebody may say, you know, every preacher, you know, every Monday morning quits, and then by Saturday night he's back at work again.
Yeah.
But how do we prevent this from boiling up and exploding?
Well, I think one of the things that has helped me since that time is what I learned when I finally did open up, and when people finally did come to know the things that I was struggling with, you know, feeling completely inadequate for the jobs that I was doing, and all of that. What I found was that the fear that I had of if people found out that I wasn't some rock solid, stable, spiritual giant, that they were just that they would lose all respect for me and wouldn't listen to me or whatever. Those fears were completely unfounded, and the exact opposite was true. I can't tell you how many people have come to me who were members of the congregation itself, and then other preachers that have contacted me about it, learning of what I went through, that have said, you know, not that they wanted me to have to go through that, but they said, you know what, it's really good to know that you're human, that you know that you struggle too with things that we struggle with. It actually created, I think, more of a sense of family and closeness, and less of a sense of being aloof when people came to realize, you know what, he's just a normal guy. He struggles too, and I think when people know that, I think it helps the relationship for people to realize that you struggle too, and so you know what they're going through when they come to you with struggle. So I would say that first and foremost. Don't, stop. Preachers need to stop this nonsense of trying to put out this image of themselves that is that's less than accurate, right? I mean, even God in the Bible shows, even spiritual giants, shows them even when they're struggling. And, I think we've had a tendency, people generally, have had a tendency to, oddly enough, humanize God and deify people. Mm-hmm. They try to make God to be like a human being, and that's wrong. But then we'll take human beings and we'll lift them up and put them on pedestals that they don't deserve to be on, because they struggle too. And so, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, James said, James chapter 5. And Elijah is a great example of burnout, 1 Kings 19, and it's a passage I go to talk about the process of how you get there and how you come out of it. And so that, I think, as far as, preventing it or dealing with it, stop trying to present yourself as something you're not. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to recognize your limitations. I think that was one of the things that led to my meltdown, was I had taken too much on myself. At the time that I had the time that I quit, I was doing, I was a pulpit preacher at the congregation there. I was teaching classes in the School of Preaching. I was doing the TV program, 30-minute TV program every week. And
bulletin articles.
Yeah, all that.
Teaching classes.
Yeah, all that stuff. And it wasn't, just to be clear, it wasn't that the elders of the congregation just came and said, all right, we're dumping all this on you. Deal with it. That wasn't there. I had done all of that. I had gone to the elders and said, hey, I'd like to do this. And their answer was always, well, if you feel like you can, if you feel like you got the time and can do it, then we're not going to tell you not to do it. So I had done that to myself.
And at the same time, though, as a preacher, as a minister, as a servant, the reason people get into this work is to help,
right,
to serve,
yeah,
to do. We were working together at the time, and that would be what I would refer to as a very target-rich environment. There were so many excellent things the congregation was doing and opportunities that were laid at our feet, and you just want to get involved in all that for all the right reasons.
Sure.
But there's only so far you can go. Yeah,
and that's one of the characteristics of most people that are in ministry of some kind, is they want, you're there because you want to be involved, because you want to work. And when a congregation has so many opportunities, you want to have your hand in all that. But one of the reasons why God gave human beings limits is to remind us of who's God and who isn't. God's the only one that doesn't have limits.
Right.
but He created us with limits. When I try to act like I don't have any, when I try to fill my life with so much activity that it's more than I can bear, and I'm acting like, and I'm taking on more because because I think I'm supposed to, and I'm essentially acting like I don't have any limits, then I'm basically calling into question God's creative genius. God created me with limits, and I honor Him when I honor the limits that He's made as a part of me. And people have different limits. Some people can handle more of a workload than other people can, right? Each preacher has to determine what are my limits? What can I do and do well versus how much can I get my hands in stuff and end up not doing any of it well.
Let me throw this out at you. You know, the thing that's always nagging at us is, well, to him who knows good that he could do, and he doesn't do it, to him it's sin.
Yeah.
Oh, here's an opportunity. I just have to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And some people would go as far as to say, well, God expects me to fully take advantage of every possible thing that I see that I could possibly do.
Yeah, but that's wrong. And I don't mean to be harsh, but think about it like this. Anytime we decide that we're going to stop doing something good at the end of a particular day, for example, it's arbitrary, right? Let's say I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm going gangbusters, doing everything. It's all good work. It's all the Lord's work. And I get down to 7 o'clock at night. And I say, you know what? I'm tired. I need to go to sleep. Well, could you argue? But you know what? You could make one more phone call. You could make one more visit. You could read one more passage of Scripture. You could write one more bulletin article. So you get, let's say you get 6 hours of sleep at night. Could you survive on 5? If you could survive, could you survive on 4? My point is, any time that we stop doing something good and rest or whatever, it's an arbitrary thing. It's different for each person, and so you have to decide. All right, God created my body in such a way that my body needs rest. God made us that way. When I try to act like I don't need any rest, again, I'm calling into question God's creative genius. And so I need to stop thinking that I'm the only one that can do this the right way. I'm the only one that can be involved in this. If I want to get it done, I'm going to have to do it right. When I try to do all of that myself, not only am I not handling my own limitations the way I should, but I'm also in the process keeping other people from being able to serve God too. If I think that I'm the only one that can do this, number one, that's pretty prideful and arrogant of me to think that. But number two, it also prevents other people from being able, who want to serve and be active, it prevents them from being able to do it if I'm saying, no, I got to do this because I want it done right. And those kinds of attitudes are found a lot in people who are in ministry because they tend to have, that kind of a personality, the whole type A thing.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to fight against that and recognize that it's okay to rest. It's okay to not necessarily be involved in everything. Didn't Paul talk about in 1 Corinthians 12 about, people have different abilities? And if everybody had the same ability, the same gift, that, a lot of things would go undone. Now, he's talking about miraculous gifts there. I understand that, but I think the principle's still there.
Oh, apply it, absolutely.
That everybody has different abilities and different talents and different things that they can offer, and we have to respect what our abilities are and fulfill those, but not try to so spread ourselves so thin, trying to do everything, that we end up doing nothing very well, and the work suffers because of that. We think we're trying to help everything, but if we're trying to do everything ourselves, we're actually hindering the work, and that's not really what we want to do, ultimately.
So finding those limits, where those are, and being able to be satisfied working within those limits.
Yeah.
That sounds like some great advice.
Well, it's necessary, but it's not always easy. You know, it wasn't easy for me because I knew in the aftermath of all of that, I knew that after I had kind of assessed where I was and all that, I knew I was going to have to give something up. I was doing three main things: the pulpit work, the TV program, and the school of preaching, and all three good works. And so I ended up, at the time, I gave up teaching in the school because I knew I had to get something off my plate. I just couldn't keep up that pace anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I had to give that up. And it wasn't easy to walk into the classroom like I had to do that day and tell the guys, you know, I can't do it anymore, you know. And I had to make a choice to give up something, and so that's what I gave up at the time. And it's not easy. It's a blow to your pride when, for example, when you've seen other people, and this is part of the problem, when you see other people that are able to wear multiple hats, you know, and you think about other people that have done pulpit work, and they've done school of preaching work, and they've done this, that, and the other all at the same time, and they've done it so well. And then you look at that and you say, well, if they could have done it, if they did it, why can't I do it? And you start comparing yourselves to others instead of recognizing, you know what? God bless that person. And I'm thankful for people that can wear multiple hats and do a lot of things and do them well. But my limits are not necessarily theirs. The parable of the talents teaches, you know, God gave to each one according to his ability. I think that's interesting that he says that. God distributed the talents according to his ability. Well, in the same way, God blesses us with opportunity and blesses us with abilities and responsibilities that are commensurate with our ability to do them. And so God doesn't expect me to do more than what I have the capacity to do. He expects me to do what I can, but he expects me only to do what I can. And I had to come to grips with that and realize that, you know what, sometimes it's okay to say no. Sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, that's a great work, but I just don't have the time and energy to put into it. Let's see if we can find somebody else who needs an opportunity to serve and let them fill that role. And when you can reach the point where you're okay with yourself in saying, you know what, I can't do that. I'd love to, it's a great work, but I can't. My plate's full right now. To reach that point where you can say that and be okay with it is part of what will keep you from reaching that burnout stage.
And part of that, I think, for our viewers, those who aren't preachers and things like that, elders and members of the congregation, I think sometimes feel slighted when they hear that. You know, oh, I've got this great idea that I'd like for you to do. Yeah. They feel a little slighted. I guess the message for them is, you know, it's, and I know you probably better than you're comfortable with sometimes, but you're not lazy. You're not somebody who's trying to shirk off work. Yeah. You know, it's the desire, if you were the type of person who could physically work 90 hours a week, doing good and doing things productive, you'd be there. Yeah. But, you know, realizing that, you know, if I could, I would, mm-hmm. but I can't. I'm limited by this physical body. Yeah.
That's tough, because one of the things that I wrestled with, and to be honest with you, I still wrestle with it to a great degree, is my concern over what other people think. I have always struggled with that. And one of the things, again, that helps me is to periodically refocus my thinking back to a more biblical parameter, in that my desire should be, and my ultimate goal is to please God, and not to please people around me. Right? If I were pleasing man, I would not be the servant of Christ. Paul said, Galatians 1:10. And so, if if I'm honest with myself and honest with God, because I'm going to stand before God and be judged. And if I remember that, and I have that proper fear of and respect for God, knowing that I'll stand before Him and be judged one day, then I can make those decisions about whether or not I should be involved in this work or that work, and honestly assess that. And if I know in my heart, as I know God knows my heart, that I'm not being lazy and not just trying to get out of work, but if I truly am convinced that I just don't have the time and energy available because of the other works I'm involved in, to be involved in this work, then I can say no and risk hurting someone's feelings, not because I intend to, not because I want to, but sometimes if people's feelings are hurt because you can't be involved in their particular project, I can live with that easier than I can live with God being disappointed in me because I'm not being appreciative of the limits that He's placed on me. And so it ultimately comes back to, who am I trying to please? Am I trying to please God and do the works that I'm right now involved in, and do them well and do them to the ability that I should because of the nature of them? Mm-hmm. Can I do that? And if I focus on that and pleasing God and doing those things, then sometimes when we have to say no, it breaks our hearts, but we can live with that because we know that we're involved in a lot of other things that are good that need our attention. And it just comes down again to each individual is going to have to assess that for themselves, be honest with themselves, and make decisions accordingly.
And I really think part of the reason we're doing this this segment today is there's, my estimation, a lot more people out there dealing with this, a lot of preachers that are feeling the effects of this. That's going unnoticed and unappreciated.
Yeah, I've written some things in the past that I had published online, and I've spoken in a couple of places about burnout and things like that. And I was amazed, I really was, at the number of preachers that contacted me personally and said, you know, I went through that 2 years ago, or I'm going through that now. Can we get together and talk about some things? And I was tickled to death to be able to do that because those guys were doing what I was unwilling to do when I was going through it, and that was to reach out and ask somebody for help. And if we can just get preachers to do that, to ask for help, then we can keep a lot of this burnout from happening.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic subject. I appreciate your willingness to open up and talk about this, and hopefully it'll be of benefit to those who are hearing. And for those who aren't working, maybe who are part of the 80% that allows the other 20% to do the work, feel free to step up and find your place, find your role within the church. Eddie, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.